Welcome to Gente on Air on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online WSGW.com. Now, here is your host, Larry Rodarte.
Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Gente on Air. It is wonderful to be with you tonight, this evening. I have not been in the studios in a couple of weeks, and I've had some personal issues going on. And so I'm really thrilled to be back here as we continue on into this cold fall day. It's freezing outside. It seems like the weather really changed, and that does not help with my sinuses, my allergies. And that's part of the reason why I wasn't here last week. But I know that there are listeners out there that they kind of get a little irritated when I'm not here and we play the same show on Sunday evenings. But sometimes life happens and you just can't get into the studio here. And I want to apologize to my producer, Jonathan Dent. He's here with me tonight. Jonathan Dent, how you doing?
Doing good. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, and I want to apologize because I know that I was scheduled to fill in for Art Lewis today, and I forgot all about it, right?
That's all right. We figured something out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like, it's so strange because it's just like these days are just going by so fast. I'm supposed to be at an event and I don't even know that, it's that day of, and I'm like, oh, shoot. And so it's just been so rapidly, time is just fleeting. And so, I'm happy to be back. We are doing a show here. We don't have a guest per se, but Jonathan's going to be helping me out here tonight. And we're going to talk things about Mi Gente, which we've really never done in the 3 years that I have been doing this show. I mean, we mentioned Mi Gente, of course, and things that I'm involved with, but I think the very first show, we talked a little bit about my history with Mi Gente and all, but never an actual show. And Jonathan felt that tonight would be a good time to talk about the award that I just recently received from University of Michigan Dearborn, and talk a little bit about the history of the Civica, Mi Gente, things that I'm involved with, and where the Hispanic community stands today, and what's going on in the community. So we're going to talk all about that here on this show tonight. And I'm real excited to be with everybody, like I said. And we are already October the 10th.
By the time this airs, it'll be the 15th.
The 15th.
Halfway through the month of October.
Yeah. And then 1 month from that time is the actual anniversary of Mi Gente on Air, 3 years that we've been doing this show right in the midst, thrown into this during the COVID pandemic. And so it's been quite a ride, but I think it's something that has been really helpful within the community, useful. We've featured a lot of people that are entrepreneurs or who are doing great things in our community. And we've also had some national celebrities on the show. And I want to do some more of that in the coming months as well. I've got some things lined up. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time, I can say, to be Latino in this community, in this country. And even though, we get some of the negative flack from, those that, see us that we shouldn't be here, then that we shouldn't be crossing the border. And even though my family has been here for over 100 years, I still get some of that, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. And so, we can talk a little bit about that as well. And so I want to encourage the listeners out there, those that are on the social media platform tonight, if they've got a question of me or a question of the show, Mi Gente on Air, a question of the Civica, because I am the operational manager, shoot it our way. That's what this show is going to be about. Mi Gente on Air. It's your show as well. And if you've got ideas for any future shows, please let us know. So, Jonathan, where do you want to start in regard to tonight's show?
Yeah, you mentioned that the show's been going on for 3 years, and I've been around producing it for a little over a year. I think that's a great idea. If you are in the social media stream, throw in a question. That's what this is. This is a good opportunity for a nice conversation. But I've been here for a little over a year producing this show, and I've picked up bits and pieces about the history of Mi Gente magazine, which I know that you've been in charge of for a long, long time. Not to age you, but I have picked up bits and pieces, but I don't think I've ever gotten like the full history of it. And I think that that is kind of, from what I've heard of it, a pretty cool story. So
Mm.
where did it all start?
Well, I have always had a knack for writing, even as a young child. 7 and 8 years old, I remember writing stories, on lined paper that my mom would get me. And my mom had a very good way of telling a story. And she was always telling me stories of her life and her past, her family, Saginaw community. So, there was always this information that was given to me about the Hispanic history in Saginaw because mom loved to talk about her days at Saginaw High as a Trojan back in the 1940s. And she graduated from Saginaw High in 1949. And of course, she always told me the history and stories of my father with Rodarte Builders. And so, I remember being 7 and 8 years old writing about Annie on the Farm, it was called. And it was her life with her cousins, aunts, and uncles on the farm on Wolf Road here in Saginaw. And they were migrant workers that had come in around to the area around 1928. So my great grandmother, I got to learn about her history as one of the original Damas de Guadalupe at St. Joe's Catholic Church. I got to hear about my grandfather who, started the Unión Cívica Mexicana with 10 other men in 1945. I mean, there was just all this plethora of history that I was given in my young brain. And you know how when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, you just absorb everything. And so I think that anybody who knows me today, they know that I'm kind of like a historian storyteller as well. And so I've got all that knowledge. But in 1995, I happened to be working in Detroit for Schaller Corporation. It was a big three metal stamping company that made, metal stampings for Chrysler and General Motors and Ford. And one of the great tragedies within the Hispanic community happened, and that was the death of Selena Quintanilla, the Tejano singer, who was murdered by the president of her fan club. And those of us that knew Selena knew her music, and we saw the rise of how, this Tejano singer, she was one of us. She was Mexican American. She didn't speak Spanish like so many of us who are third, fourth generation. And she had this talent, this enormous talent. She was a beacon of light. And it was really sad the day she died because, you hear about when Buddy Holly died or when Richie Valens, the day the music died. Well, that was the day the music died for Latinos in the United States. And I can't necessarily say that that was so true for even people in Mexico, because some of my cousins in Mexico didn't even know who she was, but she was the rising star that was, going to really make it and cross over, um, do bigger and better than, any past singer of Mexican descent. And so when she died, we were quite upset and all. And then all of a sudden, we started getting the news reports coming from Texas and all. And they started comparing her to the singer Madonna, her style and everything. And those of us who knew her, we knew she didn't represent that. She didn't represent that sexual part that Madonna does. Yeah, she wore the bustiers and that kind of thing, in her shows, but she didn't. She was about education, and she was young. She was 23 years old, and so I was getting more and more angry about how they were representing her falsely in the secular media. And I remember shock jock Howard Stern came out and talked about her death and made fun of it, actually. And if you knew Howard Stern in those days, he's quite lame today compared to what he was in those days. But he talked about a velvet Jesus and that Mexicans worship a velvet Jesus because we have those velvet paintings in our homes in those days. And he was just really terrible. And he had gunfire in the back of his show making fun of the death of Selena Quintanilla.
Really?
Yeah. And so, everybody kind of just, kind of accepted that and laughed it off because everybody laughed along with Howard Stern in those days, and it was a direct attack to the Mexican community. And so my fiance at the time, she said, I said, um, I should just start my own publication, because, and I said it not knowing if I could actually do that or what have you. And it was shortly right after Selena died. And she said, why don't you? And with those words, it was kind of like a challenge, and I remember I called a few people, leaders in the community, and I said, I'd like to start a publication that is about Latinos for Latinos, and showed a positive light for Latinos in our community. And so, with that idea, right after Selena passed, within 3 months, we had the first issue of with Selena on the cover, June 16th, 1995. And so it went like hotcakes. And, it's been a crazy ride because it's been almost 30 years now. And I'm just really amazed that, we've gone through the highs and lows in the economy, the 2008 recession, and one of the first things that happens with advertisers for a publication is, the minority dollars are thrown out the window when there's a recession or on. So, we really went through a rough time. And it's kind of ironic that, during the COVID shutdown and advertisers pulled quickly from the publication, of course, because a lot of the businesses closed down as well, and that made sense or all. But we threw Selena on the cover because it was 25th anniversary from when her passing, and I did a whole issue on Selena and her connection to Saginaw when she came to Saginaw, pictures of Saginawans with Selena back in 1994, I think it was, and it sold like hotcakes. I sold it on eBay. I sold it, on the social media platforms, and it was that issue that got us through the pandemic. Believe it or
Really?
not, yeah, it was wonderful, and I was really surprised because I seen that the magazine that she had fans all over the world. They weren't just Latinos; they were, all races, I believe. But she also had, we had paid subscribers from Europe, from the Netherlands, and I remember from London, from Germany. And I'm just like, holy cow, she has transcended, into this international icon, bigger in death than she was in life, because although she was, like a great phenomena with our Mexican American community, and she was trying to reach over into the Anglo community by bringing out an English album at the time of her passing, she became bigger than in death than in life. And you see that even today, the tributes from some of the performers today who remember and know now of Selena, and she's just considered that international icon. So, I mean, it was a really beautiful story. And I had no idea at the time that, Mi Gente was going to take off the way it did. I didn't know that it was going to change my life, that I had to move back from the Detroit area because it was doing so well here in Saginaw. And
Now, were you focusing on the Saginaw area with printing it and publicizing it and getting it out there, or were you doing in Detroit as well?
primarily Saginaw at
Okay.
first, but then we expanded to Lansing, Detroit.
Really?
And then I found real quickly on that we became this voice in the community that could advocate for Latino issues, and I didn't expect that, because who am I, to bring any opinion out on any issue. But by that point, and I have to mention, when I was living in Detroit prior to Selena passing, I did help and contribute to El Central newspaper, which was based in Southwest Detroit in the Mexican community. And Dolores Sanchez, she was the publisher at that time, and she was a woman, she was Latina, and I had never seen that before happen, And so I really give her credit, because she was doing her thing, and she was talking and bringing issues out about what was happening in Southwest Detroit, which, as you know, is a highly populated immigrant community that has expanded and boomed. And it's still going strong, that publication. I think they're going on 35 years. But we came after that, and I had gotten, I was very young, and I got my feet wet with that publication. And then I did an internship at the Saginaw News in 1996. And it's so funny. I want you to remember this, Jonathan, because when I was hired in to do this internship at the Saginaw News, I remember I was utilized as this diverse reporter that they could ask questions about in regard to the Mexican community in Saginaw. And we were called the Hispanic community in those days. I don't like to use that term so much, but I refer to myself as Mexican American. And you hear all these different terms about Latinx, you hear Hispanic, you hear Latino. I mean, there's just all these terms, but I like to say I'm Mexican American now. I didn't always, I was okay with that Hispanic term, but now I realize and understand that it was a term that was given to this people of this population to, bring them all together under the census back in the 1980s so that they could check off on a box Hispanic.
Mm.
And so, like, I try to get away from that. But the point I was trying to make was that, so long ago, here we were, I was doing Mi Gente, I was writing for El Central, and I moved away from a career in the medical field during the height of AIDS, believe it or not. And I was working at Henry Ford Hospital even, and I got out of that field and I found myself as a journalist. And, there were very few Latinos that were journalists in those days. So I gravitated to anybody who, was doing journalism. Rosa Morales from Delta College Broadcasting. She had graduated in the journalism field, and I asked her to be involved with Mi Gente, and she was my copy editor for 16 years. And so they were really, it was really a special time because you've seen how Selena had knocked down the doors for Latinos. And it was really there was an era in the 90s where it was really cool to be Latino, Mexican American, or what have you, because, Selena knocked down that door. And then came Shakira, Ricky Martin, Mark Anthony, all these singers. And it was cool, to be Latino because of the music scene. And, and then, we went through that period of time, when Donald Trump came and, I'm getting political here, where he talked about, Mexicans don't always send their very best. And so then we got, kind of the negative connotation put on us by this presidential candidate in 2015 when he first started come out and declared, that he was running for president. And it was tough. It has been tough. It's a lot easier now, but those first 4 years, when from the time he ran to the time he was president, it was really tough to be, Mexican American, I think, in this country, because even though he was referring those comments to, the Mexicans that were crossing the border, if you say Mexican, most people will think of the Mexicans they know in the community.
Yeah, I think the big issue when people are talking about that specifically is confusing legal and illegal immigration and immigrants. And everybody does it when they're talking about that issue, but it results in kind of static. You're not really talking about the same thing often, and it ends up people talking past each other, and it doesn't result in anything good. But no, I can see how that would be. That misunderstanding leads to a lot of hurt.
Yeah, and it did. And there was a lot of polarization, of course. We all seen it. We even seen it within our own Hispanic community. And I'm using that term again because, I'm going Latino, Hispanic, Latinx.
Well, yeah, I want to ask, though, because you touched on it earlier. What's the general thought? Because I'm obviously not in that community.
But you like the food.
I love the food. What's the general feeling about the names? And it's not like name calling names, but the label. I hear all of them being used in different times, different places, different ways by different people.
Yeah.
Is it still kind of up in the air? Is there any consensus on what the community wants? Do they actually refer to different things?
Well, if you actually dissect the meanings and maybe even Google it, you'll find that it does mean different things coming from different territories, speaking the Spanish language as opposed to coming from Latin American countries, because not all people from Latin American countries speak Spanish. There's Portuguese, there's other languages. And so I think that the older generation, I think we don't necessarily always agree with some of the terminology that is coming out for the younger generation. I know I have friends that they don't want me to use Hispanic in Mi Gente since we started. I have friends that today They do not want us to be referred to as Latinx. It's just another terminology that they're throwing at us, and so it's like a quandary within our own Hispanic community because it's difficult. The labels that are, some see it as labels put on us, nothing that we called ourselves. And if you're indigenous to, say, a particular area, maybe that's the terminology that you use. Like in my instance, Mexican American, because I'm Mexican of Mexican descent, but I'm American. But you also have those from Mexico, that in the area that they're from, it'll be part of who they call themselves as well. So it's really, I don't know if any community has that many terminology names that they're referred to, but I know that like Hispanic, that one's probably been the most derogatory, and I think a lot of people have said it through the years to me, like his panic, like what? I don't know if they're referring to whose panic, the white man's panic or what, but you know what I'm saying? So that's where, like I said, that came from the Census Bureau bringing that terminology so that we could all check that little box off. Because before 1980, I believe, if you were Mexican American, if you were Puerto Rican, you checked off the box of white. There was no indication of what type of Hispanic or Latino you were. So, it's evolved, and I'm sure, I've got Alyssa Roy. She says, I agree. I hear so much pushback on using Latinx, and Alyssa is a young individual in our community. So, it's really, we could probably do a whole show on that and bring some people in and talk about the different attitudes or beliefs that they have. I'm just talking from my own experience and on. I just prefer now, at this age, at this time, that I'm Mexican American. So, but does
that have to do more with, because I understand that, especially for families who can trace their immigration back, is it a source of pride? The Mexican American name, it shows you trace back and you take pride in that lineage. That's what it says to me anyway. I don't know if that's what you're trying to express.
Yeah, I think it is within myself. Again,
Okay.
That's what I'm talking in regards to how I feel.
Yeah.
I remember being very young and in high school and then into college, having a discussion with my parents, but mostly my mom. And I said, I'm Mexican American. I was even referring to myself as that at 18. And she says, no, you're American Mexican. And we would go back and forth, and I really couldn't understand it at the time, but I had to remember, as I got older and wiser, that, mom and dad came from a time where there was real racial problems in our community prior to, the 1960s. I mean, we're talking the 30s and the 40s. And so I remember her telling me when she went to Central Junior High School here in Saginaw, when they asked her, they would say, "Are you Mexican?" And she'd say, "No, I'm Spanish." And there was somehow a better connotation to being Spanish than there was Mexican from Mexico. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they came from a time, where they had their children, starting in 1955, and my brothers and sisters, my brother's Robert, my sister's Nancy, Joanne, I'm Larry. They got away from the names that their parents gave them, and they were from Mexico, Valeriano, Anita. So I mean, there was a difference, and so
it's intentional.
Yeah, and so now I look back and everything, and here I am in 2023, and I'm referring to myself as Mexican American. And it wasn't something that I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. It just came natural, I guess. But I try to stay. I don't say, I'm Larry Rodarte from the Latinx community. That just doesn't ring true with me. So that, that's where we are. But I think a lot of people will have different arguments about that and what they refer themselves. But I know there are some individuals, they really stick to the indigenous Aztecs and Mayans, and they don't want nothing to do with Hispanic or Latino.
So I know this is usually when Larry talks to the live stream, but now I'm interested. Those of you who are part of the Latino, Hispanic, Mexican American community, especially here locally, I'm curious. Um, what would you prefer? What do you prefer? Go ahead and throw it in the comments there, because I've heard all sorts of different and I don't want to get into semantics and, oh well, this means this means
Right.
it's the way that I'm hearing it. It kind of comes down to preference, and it's tough to know, especially as an outsider.
And unfortunately, like I say, there's just so many of those names that have been given to us,
And they
so,
have certain connotations to them
yes.
that, yeah.
Yeah, so it is difficult, and I don't think anybody could agree that you could just streamline it to one name, because within the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Mexican community, there's all different types. There's
Yeah.
there's the Puerto Ricans, there's the Colombians, there's the I met a
And
lady from
I know
Argentina recently.
I know there are people who are like, I've met people who someone tries to refer to them as Latino. No. I'm Colombian, or
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm this or that. It's different levels of specificity. I don't know. It's an interesting question, and
So those of you that are here in the room, please let us know what you like to refer to yourselves. And maybe we're bringing this question where you haven't given it much thought, but think about it. And I'd like to see what some of the answers are.
do you care? If you don't have necessarily a preference, that's a preference in and of itself, I think. Are we
Very
good to go
true.
back into the show?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Why not?
You're listening to Mi Gente on Air on WSGW.
Welcome back, mi gente. Welcome back to all my listeners out there in Radio Land, as this show is broadcast on 8 p.m. on Sunday evenings, every Sunday evening, and we're going to try to bring you fresh material, and sometimes that can't happen, but we're going to try. So, Alice, I know you're out there and you're listening, and here's a new show for you all about mi gente on air. So thanks for listening, everybody, really. But Jonathan, what's my next question as the guest?
Yeah, before we move on, we put this is broadcast on the radio in the evening on Sunday, but we also live stream this, and we put the question out to those people who were watching the live stream. Hey, what do you prefer? If you're part of that Mexican American, Hispanic, Latino community, what's the name that you prefer? And I'm seeing a lot of Mexican American. I prefer Mexican American. I'm seeing a lot more of that than anything else. We do have one. William Flores says he considers himself Chicano. So it's an interesting question, and one that deserves at least a little bit of thought, I think. Anyway, we talked a little bit about Mi Gente magazine, and that's kind of how this all got started into Mi Gente on Air. And we here at the radio station had a news story come across our desk. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, about one Larry Rodarte receiving an award at U of M in Dearborn. Tell us a little bit about that.
Wow. Yeah, I was really surprised because, believe it or not, in the 30 years that I have published Mi Gente magazine, I've gotten very few awards. And I think a lot of it has to do with that not necessarily there are too many awards out there for journalists, at least locally. And so I have received the All Area Arts Award from the Saginaw Richmond Commission, which was really nice because of my promotion of the arts and anything arts in Mi Gente, and I think on Mi Gente on Air. So this one came as a surprise because it is for the Latino workers that there is this organization at the University of Michigan Dearborn. They're trying to be very diverse and all, but they've had these conferences for a number of different years. And it was kind of ironic because, as you know, the UAW is striking right now. We have Blue Cross Blue Shield that was striking. I think there was somebody else who just went on strike as well in the news. But, it was ironic to me because here, this was all happening. They were having their conference. President Joe Biden was coming to Detroit Donald Trump was coming to Detroit to stand with the UAW strikers and all. And in the midst of all that, I'm getting this award from the United um, Latino Workers out of the University of Michigan in Dearborn. And specifically, why they gave me the award was because they need the media, in order to promote what they're trying to get across and trying to promote and organize the Latino workers. They needed the media through all these years. And they brought that up at the conference. And that's the reason why, with my work with Mi Gente magazine for all these years, they really felt that I was deserving of this award. And so it really meant a lot to me because, as you know, Jonathan, my grandfather, Joseph V. Diaz, and I talk about him a lot, and he's been gone over 50 years, believe it or not. He died when I was like 5 years old. He was so instrumental with the local 668 here in Saginaw because he worked at the gray iron plant. And in those days, it was really difficult to be a man of color working in the plants because they gave them all the dirty jobs. And so in the 1950s, he worked with the local to evolve it, to help, bring prominence to it in those days. And I remember my mom telling me he would go to Washington, D.C. And my grandfather was very educated. He was fluent in Spanish and English and was able to write it in Spanish and English. And he was the first Mexican to graduate from Saginaw High in 1928.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
so,
pretty cool.
yeah, we were pretty proud of that all the time. I mean, that's almost 100 years ago. They came, of course, in 1919 from Mexico because of the Mexican Revolution, and they crossed the border in Laredo legally, and they came and settled in the Houston area, and then eventually to the fields of gold in Michigan. They said the fields of gold, that there was all kinds of money to be made, and we know the story, of migrant workers. But then eventually, my great grandfather, his father, and he found employment at Gray Iron. So Grandpa Joe was so involved with Local 668, and a few years back, I can't even remember, I think it was 2017, 18. Remember when the UAW went on strike then? And Tony Mann, we've had him on my show here. I don't know if you were the producer at the time. He was the first Mexican American to be the president of Local 668, after all those years.
Yeah.
But, that was really something. And he's been over there in Detroit negotiating and working hard. And I want to have him on the show again to talk about this strike and what has been going on. But we went over there to the picket lines in front of Gray Iron, and we took them food, patitos, of course. And we stood in solidarity with those workers at that time. And we had the Unión Cívica Mexicana, a banner out there, and I raised my fist, and we fed the auto workers that
Very
were on
cool.
strike. Yeah. And so that was really nice. And we're seeing this again. So I'm in the midst of all that, I'm receiving this award, and I brought out a lot about, my grandfather, his involvement with Local 668, and how prominent and how important that local and that union was within my family, from the time I was 5 years old. So here we are, and I'm getting an award from those that support the unions.
And I think it's interesting that you said, because they recognized that they needed the media. And I didn't understand what you meant by that at first, but then I thought of what you said earlier, where you found, as you were publicizing Mi Gente magazine and putting it out there, you found that this is a voice for
Advocacy.
the advocacy and the community's concerns. And I think that that's an important lesson in what the media does, especially when you're talking local or independent media that operates outside the big corporate lines or whatever.
Yes.
It's a voice for, I want to say the little guy, but that's not what I mean. It's a voice for other voices to come in and have that conversation. I think it's good to recognize that.
Yeah, and from 1995 to today, we're vastly different in times in terms of how Mexican Americans are looked upon, even in our local community. And it's, I mentioned before that I worked for the Saginaw News as an internship, and I was kind of utilized as that person to, ask, well, can we write about this? Can we, and I remember specifically that there was a writer who wrote a story, and the editorial team called me in the room and they said, "Can we use this, or is this offensive?" And they described an individual in our community as looking like the Frito Bandito. And I
Mhm.
said, "Yes, that is negative." I says, "You're calling him a bandit." And, so they didn't use it. They utilized my knowledge in that, and they finally saw what it was, right? And that was 1996. Well, move forward 2023, I'm receiving this. It's called the Domingo Nick Reyes Award. And Domingo Nick Reyes was a journalist back in the 70s, that this organization, the Latino Workers, they named this award specifically after this individual. And he really worked for eliminating terminology that was derogatory to Mexican Americans and Latinos in this country. And one of them was the Frito Bandito.
Really?
That's what he's known for. If you look up Google, and that's what he fought for, to remove that connotation, as well as Speedy Gonzalez, who we all know, the cartoons and all.
Mhm.
But in those days, Frito Lays, they really used that Frito Bandito to push the Fritos and stuff. You're too young to know.
Yeah, I am.
But yeah, so isn't that kind of funny
Yeah.
that here, after all these years, I'm receiving an award with this individual's name? It was an honor. It was really an honor for me, because he really stood tall. And I remember in the speech that I gave that day, and we kind of talked all about kind of what we're talking about here in regards to the award. I remember I said, "I stand on the shoulders of my grandfather, Joseph E. Diaz. I stand on the shoulders of Domingo Nick Reyes. I stand on the shoulders of Julio Guerrero, who nominated me for this award. And I stand on the shoulders of my good friend Elena Herrada, who is from Detroit, who she's always advocating for Latino issues." And so she was there. They were both there, and they were the ones that presented me with the award, which was really cool. And I just said, we have to work and do what we can for Latino workers. And, I remember my mind flashed back, to, of course, my grandfather, my great grandfather working in the great iron plant. But I also thought about those who are working the food trucks these days, and
Mm.
how some of the negative connotations that we get, like, and I know I've talked with you about this in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have recently, as my involvement with Mr. Patito Man in the food truck, I've been called taco bender. I've been referred to that I should be back on the other side of the border. I mean, just these things that they think is funny, but I hadn't heard taco bender in probably 30, 40 years when I was in
Yeah.
high school. How
Yeah.
childish was that? How what's the word I'm trying to think?
Childish?
Childish, but there was a probably something I shouldn't say on the air, so we'll leave it at that. But it was really nice, because these people are predominantly in the Detroit market area, and I was receiving an award, not necessarily from my peers of knowing my work, but it was more
It's
of,
outside of
yeah,
their
yeah, but it was more for the work that I have done,
yeah.
and they were knowledgeable of that, and that spoke volumes to receiving that award. And so I was very, very happy that they were, acknowledge me in that way after almost 30 years.
Now, almost no endeavor gets close to 30 years running without quite a bit of support. And I know you mentioned Rosa Morales with Delta. Who's helped you along the way there?
Oh man, so many people. In terms of journalists, like I said, Rosa, also Dolores Sanchez from Detroit, who started that publication. She was kind of that role model that said, "Yes, you can do this as a Latino." There were very few publications out. There's a whole bunch now, but in those days, it was very difficult to start a publication. Who did that?
Yeah.
Who would do that? And I've been really blessed that I've been my own boss for almost 30 years. I didn't have to go, find an employer to support me. I did it on my own. I had help along the way, initially from family members. But I have to say this. I said, of course, my mother and father, were very supportive. Dad, in his success as Rodarte builders, allowed me to get a very good education through Michigan State University. that he paid for, and
Mhm.
in the 1980s, that was very difficult for any Latinos, I think. So, I always say I'm his American dream. He wanted that better life, getting out of the fields and working and having a career. And mom supported him all the way, because she's the one that had the education and graduated from Saginaw High. And she was very intelligent and a storyteller. But, I have to say that I have to give credit to my cousins, Angela Blanco, um, and Valerie Blanco, and Juanita Rodarte, and of course their mother was my aunt, Angelina Blanco. They were my backbone, they were my backbone through all these years. And, I'd say, like, my 92-year-old aunt, Della Chintaka, who, when I received my award from the All American or All Area Arts Award, I went right to her house, and gave her the award. Well, actually, I gave her the flowers that I had received because I wasn't real big on flowers, but I recognize that she has stood with me,
Mhm.
through thick and thin. And when you put yourself out there in a position like I have within the community, you get a lot of knocks, you get a lot of hits. I get them almost daily, believe it or not. And it's really sad because um, rather than having some individuals look to me as maybe possibly a mentor or somebody who can advise them on how to do things, or they just want to knock me down. They want to bring up things that are unnecessary. And and I want to say, I was at a conference recently, and we were welcoming the incoming president of Saginaw Valley State University,
Yeah.
and it was a really nice event. And it was for the Latino community to welcome him into the community, get to know him. And I remember Dr. Roberto Garcia. He works at SDSU in the multicultural department. I don't know your title, Roberto, but he talked and got up and introduced the new incoming president. But he did kind of reprimand those in the room, the Hispanic community, the Latino community, and it ranged from the very young to the very old. And he said, "Watch what you post on social media, specifically Facebook, because if you're posting, basically to be divisive and to cause division, it's hurtful. It can be really hurtful." And we get a lot of hits, especially in the time when we're thriving. And I'm talking about the Union Cívica Mexicana. We have a very successful Cinco de Mayo. I mean, you've seen the thousands that come in to
Mhm.
Saginaw. I think it's the largest event in the city of Saginaw. And yet, after we have that event, people are just knocking us. They're knocking us down, and saying we did this wrong, we did that wrong, and it's hurtful, because
I
who would put themselves out there to do that kind of event?
and I wonder if it has a lot to do with the fact that, relatively speaking, the Union Civica is relatively small to be able to put on an event like that. The Union Civica it's a small one, and it's very localized. It doesn't have the benefit of a giant corporate wall to hide
Hmm.
behind or anything like that. So I can see how that might make the organization vulnerable,
Yeah, and
to stuff like that.
it really is. And just recently, we got a direct attack. And I don't want to be negative. I don't want
Yeah,
to,
no,
bring
no,
all this
no.
stuff, but I think it's important what Dr. Roberto Garcia said, because it's so true. It does cause division within the communities of our people. Instead of working together, we're divided, and isn't that what this country's been recently, the polarization of so many people within our communities, in our cities. But it's somebody said of the Union Cívica Mexicana recently, they said, that the bathrooms don't work and the air condition doesn't work. And it's not true. We've put in a lot of money, 7,000 to fix the men's bathroom. We've put in about 4,000 to fix the women's bathroom. They each have 5 to 6 toilets. They all work, you know. So it was a blatant lie that, the individual didn't. I don't even know the last time I seen him come to the Union Civica. The air condition does work, you know. It's just that we had to learn that if you're going to have an event and you want it to be cool, you have to put it on the whole day before, in order to
Mhm.
have the building cool down in the midst of muggy, hot Saginaw weather, And so, we have to stop and think about what we post on social media, because if you're looking to argue and fight, and there's a way to do things if you're going to advocate for something.
And
It's not about division.
on the other side of that coin, and it's something that a lot of content creators that are out there kind of deal with, is you got to be careful what you accept on social media. Something that a lot of content creators say is never read the comments. Never,
Yeah.
because as much positivity as will be in there, that one negative comment will stick with you, and it'll eat away at you. And if you engage with it, it's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
Generally speaking. So
And, and the master of that, and I'll say this right here, is Donald Trump. He can say something so negative, he can call Hillary Clinton crooked, and it just runs, through rampant. And one time, an individual that was very close to me was talking about Hillary Clinton. They said, "Oh, crooked Hillary." And I'm like, "Do you even know why you're calling her crooked Hillary?" And they couldn't explain to me why, And I'm like, "You're just listening to the propaganda and the negativity of Donald Trump." And so, I'm not trying to be negative here or anything, but I do think that I'm going to go back to, why I started Mi Gente magazine. It was a Mi Gente newspaper in 1995. It was to promote Latino issues. It was a publication that was for Latinos, by Latinos, and it was promoting positive images. That's why. And that's why I'm trying to do here on Mi Gente on Air. You rarely ever will hear me get into a controversial issue and talk negative.
Well, I remember, speaking of Cinco de Mayo, who was it that had the other event at the Mexican American Council, and there was drama about it, and you brought him on. It's no. There's no fight here, and I think that a lot of people want to make issues where there might not necessarily be issues. But
yeah, and Anthony Bertie Rendon,
right,
he was the one
that's
that came on, and I respected how he's an advocate for Latino issues in our community, and he walks the walk. He does what he says he's going to do. There's so many that don't, and yet those that were supportive of him, they were knocking me down. They're knocking the Civica down. They said that I talked about smoking weed on the air here on this, and I never even mentioned weed. I mean, it was so pathetic. But that's the negativity that we as a community need to get away from if you truly are looking to unify and advance this community. Enough is enough.
Well, I do want to turn that a little bit. And Anthony's a younger guy. Not that you're an older guy, but
I'm old.
There's a generational difference there.
Yes.
And how do you see that generation, the new generation, carrying on that legacy fight, that effort to promote Latino culture, concerns, and contributions?
Well, if they want to be successful, I can say this, that they need to get away from being negative. They need to get away from,
I think there's plenty of positivity out there.
Yeah, but they need to get away from, saying old and new and young, because, if we're not that big of a community that we can support, say, the dances that we put on or whatever. We want to invite everybody, because that's what it's going to take, especially post-COVID, because now, our musical bands, entertainers, the charge for them to come and play has risen, quite a bit. And not to say that that they shouldn't, because it's their time and their effort, and they're putting the instruments up and all that kind of stuff. But so we need to really support what we're doing, and try to more or less not always have events on the same day. And I'm very conscientious of that, and have always tried to not step on anybody's toes and all, but you're right. There is a lot of positivity. The young people today are way farther along than what my generation was in terms of getting involved with the community, sitting on boards, in our community, as well as
that's what I see.
Yeah.
As a reporter, that's what I see a lot of.
Yeah. And in fact, Delta College is having a Dia de los Muertos celebration on November the 2nd. Ours at the Civic is November the 4th. Delta College is having ofrendas and a celebration, and it's really nice to see that has evolved with the organization of Latino students there. and that Delta College allows it and promotes it now, because 20 years ago that never would have happened.
Mhm.
So we are much more advanced in terms of trying to propagate Latino culture in this community, and I think it's much more accepting across the board in
And
the Great Lakes
I
Bay
think the
region.
important thing is, especially when we're talking about propagating the culture in this community, it's not pushing it. It is showing the people that are here,
Yes.
because that community is here. And it's a matter of, it's not a, hey, we need to bring this in where it isn't, it doesn't fit necessarily. It is,
Hmm.
we need to bring it in where the people who belong to that community are. And I think that it's great to see more and more of that, especially because the culture is so much fun.
Yeah,
It really is.
yeah. The food, and the entertainment that we have, So yeah, that it's bringing that awareness, and that's what we're doing here at Mi Gente on Air, and that's why I agreed to do the show when I was asked to do Mi Gente on Air, was because I knew that there are issues like, say, Dia de los Muertos, who people, just the listening audience, just didn't know what that stood for, really,
Yeah.
and so we bring that awareness to teach, to educate, and to promote those positive images, and talk about our culture, our concerns, and what's the third one?
Contributions.
And that's a big one for all of us. So thank you, everybody, for allowing me to express myself this day, October the 10th, 2023. Talk about Mi Gente on Air, the Union Civica, and all that's happening in my life. So thank you so much. Hasta luego. Until next week. Okay, yeah, thank you so much, everybody. A lot of comments in the room tonight. I'm going to throw on my glasses because I do want to bring up some of these, even though we're off the air in terms of the broadcast, but we're broadcasting live on social media. Angela Blanco, she says, we just keep moving forward, smile, and continue with prayer. Who wants patitos, carnitas, and more dancing? Let's go. Our historical Queen dance is November the 25th. It's nice to see Antonio Villarreal. He's a Saginaw native, but lives out in Detroit now. He says, hurt people hurt people. Also, this is the most promotion of the culture I've seen in Saginaw in a long time. Thanks for that, Antonio. Um, Jessica Gomez, she's a grandma. She's a grandma to one of my workers, and she says Mexican American or Latina. That's what she
Yeah,
prefers.
and I think that that's an interesting. I wanted to touch on that because the it's like what you said, with the Mexican American being a personal expression of pride in where you came from, where your family is from, and everything they went through to get there. Who said that? I think it was Angela Blanco. Said, I say it with much pride for parents and grandparents and all the sacrifices they made for our family. I think that's a great encapsulation of kind of what you were trying to say with that. And I think it's interesting that we see quite a few people saying that in the response. Not that there's anything wrong with saying something different. Um, I think it's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah,
And
I think we can have some guests. We should probably, maybe open up sometimes on some of our shows and ask the guests, what do you prefer to be called?
yeah, and why? I
Yeah.
think why is a big part of that.
Well, Val Blanco, she's on here as well, and she says that when I had my girls, I already knew I wasn't picking a common name. How many Katianas and Omayas do you know? I'm proud Mexican American.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you see a change in the generations where, like I said, my mother and father, my father's name Valeriano, he never liked his name. He would tell me that, and so that's why I'm Larry today. And then you've got where now the younger generation is bringing back names like Tatiana and Omaya, so boy, just the gamut sure does swing, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So what do you think, though, Jonathan? What's your personal thoughts on being the producer of Mi Gente on Air?
It's fun. I like learning about stuff. I think that's, as a reporter, that's the most fun part of the job. Is I get to go out and I get to learn about things. Today I was out at the Shiawassee National Wildlife Refuge, and I learned all about that, and I came back, I wrote a story about it. So it's really fun to have a consistent show where I learn about something new from the Latino community, Hispanic, Latino, Mexican American, Saginaw community. I'm not going to try and cover all of them, but I think that it's interesting, and I
Yeah.
like learning about it.
Yeah, and I can honestly say when you came on as my producer, I felt that wow, I wonder how this is going to go because you're so much younger. One, and how much do you really know about the Latino community here in Saginaw because you're from the Thumb area,
No,
right?
I'm from little ways north of up in Standish,
Standish,
and
okay.
I moved within the last decade, so I've no real roots to speak of in the area.
Yeah, so that's awesome because you're doing a great job. I heard the show today, by the way, and the questions you were asking, and Jonathan, for what you've been here a year now,
2 years.
2 years has it really been?
I know.
Wow.
That surprised me last month when it showed up.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you've come a long way. You've moved up the ranks, and you're doing a lot for this station. You really are. I hear you on there, and you're pushing the buttons and all that. But you're also doing news, and
It's
you're doing
fun.
broadcasting, and yeah, that's really it speaks volumes to your work because that doesn't come easy in any station. And as far as I know, you have to have a whole lot of experience and credentials in order to get to where you're at.
Larry, my ego can only get so big. You should probably stop.
Okay. So thanks everybody again for being with us and supporting me, Gente on Air. We're gonna have to plan a 3-year show, and because I think that's a great accomplishment too, because I'm still here doing it and able to do it, even as I've gone to Europe and whatever, and I've come, did some what do you call those shows when you do them in advance?
Evergreens.
Evergreen shows. And so if you got any ideas, please shoot them my way for any upcoming shows and all, and we'll make it happen. And we'll try to be very positive and support what everybody's doing in the community. So thank you so much again, and adios, arrivederci, hasta luego, good night.